Yeah, hello, welcome to the Tree Fruit Growers Collective, live on Facebook, live on YouTube. It's nice to have you on board this morning. This afternoon. I guess I went to church this morning, got me a good nap, lost track of time. Nice to have you on board. Missed you last week. We didn't have this session last week because of Father's Day. So I hope you're able to barbecue. I got the big barbecue out over there and grilled up some corn on the cob and some chicken and played some yard games. Boy, we had a really good time. We've been in a cool down this week. Still picking some late cherries, still picking some lapins and some skenas, and sweethearts are yet to come, some crystallinas. But largely, we've turned our focus to thinning. So the videos that I've been posting throughout the week, largely those are focusing on thinning and thinning techniques and how to identify bruises. And I hope those are helpful to you. Been a lot of questions in the last week since we didn't have a session there last Sunday, so we're going to try to jump into those questions right now. And it's nice to have you on board. I'm sure people are going to be joining as we go along here. There's a couple things that there's going to been a lot of questions on. I put some videos out on that I wanted to talk about real quick before we jump into the questions. First thing about those is irrigation. How to make irrigation recommendations. I put some information on there about how we probe our irrigation and soil moisture content and these sort of things. But people have been specifically asking me, how do you make the recommendations? And so last week I tried to post the formula online, but I'm just going to go over that real quick. There's a couple things that you're going to need in order to make a good irrigation recommendation. There's some things that you need to take into consideration. You want to know how much water is lost to evaporation. The hotter it is, the more water you're going to lose to evaporation, and depending on your sprinkler type. If you have foggers, you're going to lose a lot more water to evaporation. So you want to know what your water loss is due to evaporation. That's very important. You want to know what your plant usage is. Depending on what type of a plant it is, that's monitored and that's measured, and you need to know what your plant usage is. If you put those two things together, water loss to evaporation and plant usage, those two things equals evapotranspiration. You'll hear me talking about evapotranspiration quite a bit, and that's what that is. That's the amount of water that you need to replace what's been lost in the plant, and that's what they use to formulate that. You also want to know what your desired SMC or soil moisture capacity is. You want to know what it is desired. If you're, I always like 80% of soil moisture capacity. But in a wine grape, you might be pulling back the water on a wine grape, but it might be different. Honey crisp or a block that tends to have a large fruit, you might be doing deficit irrigation, and it might be less. So you want to know what your soil moisture content is, your desired soil moisture content. How do we monitor this? How do we measure these things? Evapotranspiration, we've got a neat site here in Washington State, and it's on what's called the Ag Weather Net. It's a great site. It's ran by the Prosser Research Station out here at Washington State University, and it actually has an evapotranspiration page on there. You can go on there, and whether you're growing alfalfa or whatever it is, apples, whatever it is you happen to be growing, it will give you an accurate evapotranspiration rate. So hopefully you have some sort of a research station or an extension agency close to you. Look into that, and I bet they have an soil probe. I'm a big fan of a soil probe, a hand soil probe. So you can actually look at that first foot and get it in your hand and look at it and measure it. And then go into that second foot and look at it and visually. I'm a visual person. I want to be able to see that with my own hands. And of course, technology. We have a technology called Phytech. We have fancy technology out in the field, soil probes that measure and give us in real time what's going on out in the soil. So those are real important. But in order to make a recommendation, basically there's a couple things you're going to need to know. You're going to know your sprinkler output in inches per hour. How do you find that out? I would just go to my local irrigation store. The same people that make my little blueprint when I want to put in a new irrigation system, those people should easily be able to tell you what your output is in your sprinklers. Just call them up and say, hey, I have an R10. What's my output in inches per hour on an R10? And they'll tell you that. That's real easy to get your hands on that. Evapotranspiration rate, you're going to want to know that. Again, we use Ag Weather Net here from WSU. That's a great site, but you'll have a site specific to your location that will give you the evapotranspiration rate. And current status, what's the status of your soil? What's the capacity that I'm going to look for? So the formula looks like this. How many inches of water do I need? The evapotranspiration is going to give you that. Divide that by the sprinkler output. Most of my sprinkler output is 0.08, 0.10 on these on these small micro sprinklers that we're using, and even the drip line. So know your sprinkler output. So if you take your inches of water, divide it by your sprinkler output, that'll tell you how many inches or how many hours of water that you're going to need for your block in that week. So as an example, if you need 1 inch of water and your sprinkler output is 0.08 inches, you're going to need 12.5 hours of water. You're going to need a 12.5 hour set. You might do that in 2 sets of 6 or whatever, depending upon your soil, but that's basically how much water you're going to need. So I hope that helps. We posted that on the page just a week ago, so you can find that formula on there. What else do we have today? A lot of questions about little cherry disease and Western X. I really treat these very similarly. They're very similar viruses. And you know what? Tonight I did a quick Google, and I just Googled little cherry disease WSU. And it popped up a site. Bridget's on board. Bridget von Norenberg. It's welcome. It's nice to have you on board. I just Googled little cherry disease WSU, and all the information in the world popped up on there. Great information. Little cherry disease, it can be transmitted by grafting. It can be transmitted by vectors. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But what I like to do is I like to look early in the season, and what you'll notice is you'll notice cherries that are smaller. What it does is it inhibits sugar production in the cherries. Those cherries won't produce sugar. Little cherry disease, those cherries will happen to be smaller, and you'll be able to tell early on in the season that something's different about those cherries. They have a different color. They're not sizing the same as the other cherries. As the leaves are coming out and getting big, the leaves will be smaller on those trees. And what we like to do is we always like to get somebody out there and flag all of those trees early in the season. We get them flagged and we watch them, and if they continue to exhibit those symptoms, we'll pull a sample and take it into the research station and determine what it is. Is it little cherry disease? Is it Western X? What is it? Once we've identified what it is, we know we want to get it out of the field. The correct way to do that is to cut the tree off and paint the top of it with Roundup, paint the stump with Roundup. And what that will do is that tree will suck that Roundup back down into the root system, and inevitably it'll kill the tree. But what it also does is those roots, those connecting roots that are connected to that infected tree will also become infected by the Roundup. And you'll be able to see the signs of Roundup poisoning pretty quickly in those trees. That should tell you that those trees have also been in contact with Western X or little cherry disease, and they should also be pointed out. So largely it'll tell you how big the circle is of trees that you need to remove, depending upon how many trees are showing the signs and symptoms of Roundup damage. So that's kind of the way you do that. How's it transmitted? Little cherry disease is transmitted by grape mealybug, apple mealybug, so it's transmitted by mealybugs. The host for Western X, I believe, is leafhoppers. So you're going to want to get those removed, get them out of the orchard, and then what we like to do is post-harvest, we like to treat those leafhoppers, and of course, at the right timing, you want to treat those mealybugs, because those are the vectors, those are the hosts that are going to move that around in your orchard. But again, orchard sanitation is really important. You want to get those things out of the orchard as soon as you possibly can. Raul Corona's on board. Welcome, Raul. It's nice to have you on board. I'm fumbling around here a little bit because we got a little wind out here tonight. Real quick, wanted to talk about cooling and sunburn protectants. It's really hot this time of year, so cooling. We're in cooling season, and one of the things we've been talking about, since we have some milder temperatures, normally we'd have triple-digit temperatures this time of year, but we've been seeing 85, 90-degree temperatures, pretty mild for this time of year. It's a great opportunity to let those apples acclimate. I always say when you first start cooling apples early on, when they're, that golf ball size and that heat first comes on, you want to let them take a little bit of heat and let that apple acclimate. We'll wait and let it, 90 degrees, depending on the apple that you have and the canopy of the tree. Sometimes we'll let them go as far as 90 degrees before we turn on the cooling. Because typically whatever you acclimate that apple to, that's what it's going to be sensitive to. So we like to let them acclimate a little bit this time of year. but typically we'll let them acclimate to about 90 degrees, and then we'll start turning on about 90 degrees. Like to use sunburn protectant. We use a variety of sunburn protectants. We use Park on the colored varieties, and I like to use Microcal or Surround on grannies, those varieties that don't have color. And in organics, we use a product called Oasis O. And we'll usually do about 3 applications of those products. And then if we're going to see a real hot heat wave, we'll do a border spray again, and maybe just a west side of the row where you get that intense afternoon heat. Save a little bit of money. Sometimes we'll just do west side only and borders. Another thing I want to mention about that real quick is after you thin, that fruit's going to be very sensitive. So anytime you thin, you're going to either want to turn on the cooling earlier, or you're going to want to make sure and follow up with a sunburn protectant. Pull them out of the field a little quicker and follow up with a sunburn protectant. That's real important. So, yeah, it's cooling season. Vanch is on board tonight. John Becker's here. Antonio Perdomo's on board. Welcome. It's nice to have you on board tonight. Had a question about pre-plant fumigation. We haven't talked about that much. We've talked about it a couple times. But somebody asked about fumigation, and if I could talk about that just a little bit. Ryan Kelsey actually brought that up. I know Ryan. He's a good field man. So the first question about fumigation is always to fumigate or not to fumigate. And my answer that has been brought about by many years of experience and several catastrophes is yes, you should always fumigate. I would always fumigate. And I, at this point, I wouldn't let anybody talk me out of fumigate. It is just so important. I've seen too many disasters. To fumigate or not to fumigate, anytime I'm in a replant situation, I want to make sure and fumigate that block. It's very important. So first thing I want to do is I want to prepare the soil early. I like to identify the blocks that I'm going to replant next year, and I'll start on those blocks at about harvest timing. First thing you want to do is pull out the old trees and get them out of the ground. Very important. Get that ground disced up and opened up, and it's real important before you go into the winter to make sure that your soil moisture capacity in those blocks is filled up. You want to have really, really good moisture in those blocks. For us sometimes, because you pulled the blocks out, you've also pulled the sprinklers out in some cases. So if the block's still in there, wet it up before you pull the trees out. But if it's too late, you pulled the trees and the block's dry, even put hand lines out there. It's real important that you get the soil, the moisture profile built up in that soil if you're going to fumigate in the spring. And since I love to plant early to get those trees off and growing and out of the ground, I want to make sure that ground is ready in the fall. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that my moisture content is filled up, and I'm going to open that soil up and get that prepared. If it's an organic block or I don't have access to fumigation with a company like Trident that Ryan works for, a great company, they just come out and do it for you. So we don't necessarily mess with fumigation. We'll call up Trident and say, hey, we're going to replant this block, and they just come out and do it for us. So that's really nice. But if you don't have that luxury, if you're an organic block or you're not big enough to fumigate, you can do a cover crop. It's real important the year before. It's nice to get in a cover crop and build some organic matter in that soil and get some life back into that soil. And if I'm going to replant the next year, I would use a mix that has mustard in it. I like to use a mustard mix because it'll kind of gas off and kill those nematodes and some of that bad stuff in the soil. So if you can, a good cover crop, and if you can get a mustard in that cover crop, it'll really, really help you out. So treatment. How do we treat? How do we fumigate? Back in the day, we used to use Vapam. That was a big product. Great product. Unfortunately, they don't let us use that anymore. I think now they're using a product called C17 Talone. I think it's chloropictrin. I'm not real sure. I'm not an expert on that. But I think that's what they're using nowadays, and I would definitely recommend it. It's used to combat the replant diseases that you might get, and nematodes and all manner of bad things that could be in that soil attacking those trees as soon as you get them in the ground. So I would definitely recommend fumigating before any replant situation. Okay, questions from the page. Ari Aurelis asked, codling moth treatment for organic pears. Codling moth treatment for organic pears. Always start with the lures. I would put up the pheromones or the lures above the canopy of the orchard. It's really important to get those high at the canopy of the orchard and kind of form a cloud above that tree canopy. So I would get the lures out there. the pheromone dispensers, and I would put those out at a rate of about 400 dispensers per acre. Just kind of get those in a pattern out in the block at about 400 lures per acre. How do you treat? Well, there's several treatments that we use. There's horticultural oils, mineral oils that you can spray that will help you. Entrust is a product, an organic product that you can use on pears, organic and conventional. I'm always real careful with Entrust in organic situations. It's hard on beneficials, so it's your big gun. Make sure that you really need it before you use it, but it will work. I like to put the puffers. That's the same as the dispensers that are above the canopy, but they're in an aerosol can. They kind of puff on the borders. I like to use those. Sprays that we use virus sprays. There's virus sprays, and you want to be careful with those because they are a living virus, so you keep those refrigerated, and it's better to spray those at night or in the cool of the morning. We'll use the viruses. We've got the Sidex and the Madex. We also use a product called Sidetrack, VirusSoft CP4, and of course there's Dipel. But those are the products that you can use. Good products. Some of the organic products don't work nearly as well as the conventional products. We all know that. They work to some degree, but as the temperatures get up and it gets really, really hot, above 90 degrees, those viruses don't work quite as well. You want to make sure you get those on in the cool of the morning hours and tighten up your window that you put those on. Tighten up your schedule a little bit. I think when it really gets 90 to 100 degrees, I'm tightening that up to about every 7 days. So that's what I would use to spray. Surround is a product that you can use. And also, I wanted to recommend to you, I know that the Washington State, the Prosser Research Station over here, or Washington State University, has what they call DAS, the DAWs. And it's a great tool that you can use. It's called Decision Aid. And it'll help you make recommendations on your apples and your pears and your wine grapes. It's called DAWs, WS University. It's called Decision Aid. And if you Google that, the acronym DAWs, I'm sure it will pop up. But that's a great tool that you can use. It doesn't cost you anything, and it'll help you make some of those recommendations. So I wanted to recommend that to you. You take that from me, Ronnie. What else do we got? We've got Ronnie RC. Can you please discuss the various calcium foliar formulations? Is calcium oxide okay, or do I choose a different form? I'm not an expert on calcium applications. Is calcium oxide okay? Yes, it's okay. Would I do it? No, I wouldn't do it. I surely wouldn't mix it with anything. I don't know enough about it. I know that it's burnt lime. That's what calcium oxide is. It's burnt lime. And I also know that it can be very caustic. And so I wouldn't recommend it. So if you're asking me for my recommendation, I wouldn't use it. I would use a good calcium chloride product. The product that I use is called Go Natural Calcium Plus. But there are a lot of great calcium products out there that are soft and that are not caustic. I would stay away from calcium oxide unless you're an expert and you really know how to use it. And maybe you're going to inject it or whatever. I'm not sure. I do know that it's burnt lime, and I would probably stay away from it. I just wouldn't trust it. Good question, Ronnie. Munib Rashid. Sir, in my traditional apple orchard, which is Red Delicious, I've noticed this year nearly about 15 trees that have root rot severe. What should I do with them and the rest of my healthy plants? We've talked about root rot quite a bit on here. Seems to be a big topic in some areas. First is root selection. Get a root stock that's not nearly as susceptible. What do you have? M9, I think you said. That's going to be susceptible. The 106 and the 111. Some of those older root stocks are going to be more susceptible. But I've got Geneva 41 that have phytophthora also. They get the root rot also, so they'll all get it. Most important thing I would recommend is drainage. Make sure you have good drainage. A couple of products that you can use out there that work pretty well would be Ridamil and Linebacker. So I would try those. Sumish is on board. Perry Smith Sr. is on board. Welcome. It's nice to have you with us. Sam Robles, little cherry disease from school. That's little cherry disease. We just talked about that in detail, so I'm not going to go back over that. Thank you, Sam, for the question. Shasta Palmer, how do you deal with blight on pears? What are your favorite blight-resistant pear varieties? Blight on pears, I'd treat blight on pears just like I would on apples, but I would treat it as a very susceptible variety. I'd treat it like on the scale of Pink Lady in a really bad area, in a high-risk area. So first thing is know your risk. We have models here. Also, Ag Weather Net. You can go on Ag Weather Net here at our area and look and see what the risk level is for your area. And hopefully your area has something also. So know what your risk level is for your orchard and for your block, because you're going to make decisions about whether or not to spray based on that. If you're in a high-risk area, you probably should just get on the calendar through the bloom period and just every 7 days be on the calendar and spray. But if you're in a low-risk situation, maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe you need to just spray in advance of an event, something like that. So first thing you want to do is know your risk. If you get fire blight, make sure that you sanitize the orchard. If you've got old blight from last year, it's real important that you get those cankers and that bacteria out of the orchard. The amount of bacteria in just one of those cankers is enough to infect hundreds of acres. So you want to get that out of the farm and get it burnt and be as clean as possible as right out of the gate. Non-bearing trees, those always kind of get away from you. So through the growing period, I always do a pound of copper, and I do that every 7 to 10 days on non-bearing trees. Just a pound of copper. That'll really help you with that shoot blight. So I would do that. Also spray before an event. Be proactive. Always spray preventive. The idea that those fire blight sprays reach back, I've never had very good success with that. Maybe they do. Maybe the science bears that out. I've never had good success with that. I always want to be preventive. I want to get those sprays on ahead of an incident. That's very important. Mario Vela Cruz is on board. Ryan Cox is on board. Nice to have you on board tonight. Yeah, be preventive. Spray before an event. 2 periods that always get farmers, gets me every year, got me again this year, is petal fall. I've seen the charts of the bacteria levels, and when you get to about petal fall, those bacteria levels in the orchard, they spike. They absolutely peak. They're off of the charts. So that period of petal fall, you want to make sure that you're spraying as if it was full bloom. Don't let your foot off the pedal. A lot of times the bloom is gone and it's petal fall, and we'll stop spraying, but you want to keep going through petal fall till those blooms are all off of the tree, and even beyond. If you get that late bloom or rat tail bloom, we call it, you want to do one of two things. You either want to go out and spray if there's an event coming, or sometimes it makes more sense economically to go out there and just pull those off or prune those off. But be aware of late bloom. Gets me every time. Treatments. There's some basic treatments. I've got a lot of fire blight videos in the school, SKOOL, that you can look at. We've got a lot of videos on that. Go and you can pull those up. Fireline's a great product that I like to use early. I start off with that. Firewall, I like that. That's streptomycin. Works really good. That's a big gun. Don't overuse it. I'd only use that once a year. Unless it was an emergency, then the label will allow you to use it again. Cassumin, I like to save that. That's another big gun. I tend to use that around the petal fall period or in a late event. It's a really good product. I like to use Cassumin. Blossom Protectant Organics. That's a good product for organics. I like to use Blossom Protect, and there's some good copper products, Provisto, and a couple others out there that work in the organics. So that's what I would do. Treat fire blight in the pears. I treat it just like the apples, but they're hypersensitive to fire blight. So treat it like a very sensitive variety. So this is a Jawsbot from India. I want to know about Promelin usage for branching. Again, we've got a lot of videos in the school about notching and using Promelin, but basically you're going to use Promelin. Promelin is gibberellic acid. What it does, it's a plant growth regulator, and it stimulates cell enlargement and cell division. That's what it does. It stimulates cell enlargement at the cell level, and it initiates cell division. It works really good to get feathers on trees. It works really good for branching. And so what I do is I notch about a ½ inch above the bud, and I use one of those little sponge paint brushes that kind of have a V-tip on it, but you can use about anything. And I'll mix that Promelin in a latex paint, and that's basically just so I can look at it and identify where it's at, and it protects that wound a little bit. And I'll just dot that in that notch that I put above that bud. And works really good for getting branching, and especially if you're growing on a trellis and you want to get those branches right on the wire, you can pick a bud and have very good success rate of getting those branches. In the nursery, I think they spray the Promelin on the tree to get the feathers, but yeah, Promelin works really good. for getting the feathers on the tree. And that's how I do it. I do it through notching, but I think there are spray applications that you can use. Jerome always has good questions. He was one of the people that asked about when to turn on for overhead cooling. We talked about that a little earlier. Let the apple acclimate for one thing. Let it acclimate to about 90 degrees. And I just turn on, after I've done that, I've let those apples acclimate. My golden rule is turn on at 90 degrees. The question of which blocks to turn on first, that's a different story. I want to make sure and start, the blocks that have shade net and big canopies, I'm going to start those last. The blocks that have low foliage and they're very open to the sun, I'm going to turn those on first. But you got to start it sometime. So I usually try to get started. Usually about 85 degrees, we'll get started turning on so that the blocks are on by the time it hits 90 degrees. That's the way we do it, Jared. Sheikh Nasir, how to control excessive vegetative growth in third year M9 Gala apple trees. Please suggest. Yeah, you're going to want to start getting those trees calmed down if you've filled the space. How do you do that? Pull back the end. That's a good way to do that. Begin to pull back the end. Pull back the water if you're comfortable that you've filled your space and you don't have apples that you're trying to grow, but you're talking about a third leaf tree, so you probably don't have Mary Benny apples on there that you're too worried about. Summer prune, that's a good way to do it. I always say there's two golden rules to pruning. If you prune a limb in 1-year-old wood, you make it grow. If you cut a limb in 2-year-old wood, you stop it, and it'll stop growing. It might grow out of a different shoot, but it'll stop growing. The third rule I would add to that, if you prune after the summer solstice, it'll be a de-invigorating cut versus one of those stimulative cuts early on. So summer prune, that should de-invigorate the tree also. And one of our followers on here, Kyle, Kyle mentioned root pruning. That's a great way to reduce vigor and or scoring. We've got a lot of videos on scoring in the school that you can take a look at. So I would start with those things, Sheik. Luke Norvell, on new honey grafts and mildew, do you deviate treatment, suppression, and prevention? Ah, boy, once you get mildew, it's hard to get rid of it. The fact is, I've got it in wine grape plants before, and boy, you just cannot get rid of it. So would I deviate in Honeycrisp and grafted blocks? Yeah, I would tighten up my window. I would be very preventative. I'd be on probably a 7 to 10 day schedule, and I would tighten it up I would go after Honeycrisp on grass very early. That would be my deviation. Some other blocks, I might be able to extend that period out to a couple of weeks, depending on the canopy of the tree. But Honeycrisp grass, I would stay right after those. Nishant asked about Geneva 214. I don't have it, Nishant. I'm sorry, I don't have any experience with that. Novish Amuda, does Promlin have any side effects on apple orchards? Does Promlin have any side effects on apple orchards? Promlin's a PGR. PGR is plant growth regulator. You hear me talk about them all the time. They're safe products. They're naturally made by the plant, produced within the plant. There are a few of them that I know of. There are 5 that I know of. The first one would be gibberellums. We've talked about those a couple of times tonight. Those are for flowers, initiating flowers, and cell elongation. We talk about that quite a bit. There's cytokinins. A lot of people use seaweed products and different products for root dips and, to stimulate root development. But cytokinins, they promote cell division and they delay the aging of plant tissues. They're kind of a fountain of youth side of it. So there's cytokinins, auxins. Auxins are for cell elongation and root initiation. Auxins, what are there? Abscisic acid, that's one of them. That's a growth inhibitor, and it also closes stomata of the apple. And the final one that I know of, number 5, is ethylene, and that's a gaseous hormone that regulates ripening. So we hear a lot about that. So those are the 5 PGRs that I know of. But your question is, does Promlin have any side effects on apples? It can. I think if you stay within the label, Promlin is very safe, and the side effects are, I've never really had any bad side effects from Promlin. But if you go off label, and people do that, if you go off label, yes, it can have bad side effects. It can act as a chemical thinner and make fruit drop early on in the season. And if you use it late in the season, it will affect your return bloom for the following year. So if you overuse it, if you use it rates that are not recommended, yes, it can have a negative effect. I've never had that happen to me. It's an expensive product, and so you don't want to use any more than you have to, and you only want to use it in situations where you really need it. But it is a great product. Okay, Jean Mohammed, and I've got about 5 questions here in a row that I saw that are on this very, very same thing. The question is about paclobucetrol, and 5 different people have asked me about that. Jean Mohammed says many growers use paclobucetrol as a bud booster to control vegetative growth and push the apple tree to make more flowers and buds. Booster to control vegetative growth and push the apple tree to make more flowers and buds. Is it safe to use, or should we avoid it? Paclobucetrol, I use Apogee. Apogee is prohexidine calcium, and it inhibits the natural production of gibberellums in the plant. We just talked about gibberellums and how they affect cell elongation. So yeah, these are the hormones that are responsible for cell elongation. I've never used paclobucetrol, but my understanding is it has the exact same mode of action. It's a different active ingredient, but it has the same mode of action. So all of that being said, I love it. We call it Apogee. We call it Prohex. Prohex is actually the active ingredient in Apogee. What is it called? It's called prohexidine, I believe. It's the active ingredient, paclobucetrol. It's a different active ingredient, but the function and the mode of action work exactly the same. And I really use it. I've been using it for about 10 years now to control growth where I want growth controlled. It saves me a summer pruning bill. And it'll also, I like to use it on a V-trellis system or a vertical trellis system that has windows, and I've got limbs pulled down to the wire, and I've got little upright darts growing off of those. The ideal timing to use, I don't know about paclobucetrol. I suspect it's the same. For Apogee or Prohex, the timing is at pink. You want to start really, really early in the pink stage before those buds even start pushing, and go on with that, and it'll stop the growth. And you might have to use it 2 or 3 times, maybe even 4 times. I'm not sure what the label is. I think it's maybe 3 times. Keep using it until it stops the growth of those plants. Usually one application will get it done. Sometimes it'll take 2, and in rare cases it'll take 3 applications. But just keep doing it until you get that growth stopped where you want it stopped. And yes, it'll tend to set a terminal bud on there, and that'll be a fruiting surface for the next year. I love the product. I love Apogee, Prohex, paclobucetrol. Again, I don't have any experience with it, but I think it's the same product, same mode of action, used in the same way. Paul, next question on it says, does paclobucetrol, is it good for bud formation in traditional apple trees, and which month should it be applied? Yes, I would use it I would start out at pink using it and use it until it works, until they stop growing. What else do we have here? I think we got just best way to get feathers. We just talked about that. Cherry treatment for russeting. Okay, honey, do you have any questions? I think we've gotten through these. We do have some questions. Thank you for your questions. YouTube, Absar Althoff says, there it is. What product do you use for russet control? And the reason I didn't take that question is because I'm trying to remember. But I'm going to say this about russet control. The best way to prevent russet is never spray the tree when it's wet. That's a problem we have. Most of our russet comes from either a cold night, and it'll come from frost. So running those wind machines, keeping the dew and the relative humidity out of that block. But the best thing that you can do is make sure that you have good drying conditions when you spray, especially in sensitive varieties. I'm sorry, I don't have the product on the tip of my tongue for russet control, but there are a couple good products out there. It's just not coming to mind because the truth of the matter is I try not to use them much anymore. I try to use cultural practices, and if you really are just very careful with your spraying, and you only spray during good drying conditions, and you spray the least susceptible varieties to russeting first, and then go after the sensitive varieties later in the day, when you have good drying conditions, you'll eliminate a lot of that rusting in apples. Raul Corona says, I graft 23 acres of Honeycrisp. I put 2 scion wood. Now they are healthy and growing. Now my question is, would you grow both Central Leader or one? Raul, that's a good question. And it really, a lot of it has to do, see, 23 acres of Honeycrisp, 2 scion wood. I wonder how big your trunk is. That's what I'm wondering right now. I'm wondering how much horsepower you have, because that will really influence what I do with that tree. If it has a whole lot of horsepower, I might braid it together. I would braid those limbs together, and that'll reduce the vigor in the tree right out of the gate. If I don't have tremendous amount of vigor, I would grow them separately, and if I'm a V trellis, I'd grow one up one side and one up the other side. If it's a vertical trellis, I'd just grow them up right by each other. But if I could, I would grow them up separately. Sounds great. 23 acres of Honeycrisp. I wonder where those are. That sounds really good. Love Honeycrisp. So yeah, it really depends. But if I could, I would grow them individually. If it has a lot of horsepower, I would probably braid them together. Grow both Central Leader or one. So your spacing is probably a little farther apart. So my tendency would be to braid them together and grow Central Leader. If I'm getting your block right. It's hard to say without knowing the spacing of your trees, but if you're growing a Central Leader, you may want to braid them and then grow off branching like you would on a Central Leader. Tony Russo, what's the best pollinizers for Chelan? Thanks. The best pollinizers for Chelan. I don't know what the best pollinizers for Chelan is. I can tell you what I use for Chelan because it's really a matter of timing, the timing in your area. For my Chelan, I like to use Lapins, and I have some Rainiers as well, but I like to use Lapins in my Chelans. That's a pretty good pollinizer. Again, Washington State University, they have a great research scientist out there at the university that's what he does. He is an expert on pollinizers and which pollinizers to use. And if you go to the WSU site, they'll have a list of pollinizers. I Googled that the other day. It'll tell you every pollinizer in the book. But for Chelan, that's what I use. I use Lapins and I use Rainiers. I hope that's a good answer for you. Netchie's River. Is a drip line on the first wire adequate for the V trellis, since it isn't centered over the root ball? I know exactly what you're talking about because I have some of these. When the V trellis comes up and you put that drip line on the first wire, it's on one side or the other. And I don't like that. I don't like it one little bit. I don't mind it after about the second or third year when the tree gets a little bigger and those roots grow out. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But early on when you're trying to get that tree to grow, and you want that water and that fertilizer right there at that root ball, I like to have it in the middle. So sometimes where the V comes together, I'll run a drip line right down the middle of that. Sometimes I'll run another wire. But in some cases, I have had to put it on one side or the other. If I had to choose which side to put it on, I would put it on the prevailing wind side. So if the wind's catching it a little bit, hopefully it'll get it on the target there for you. But yeah, I do have situations on V trellis where it is on one side or the other. But if you can run another wire, if you got a cheap wire, even an old wire, I think it's worth doing. But you do want to get that drip line up off the ground. Musay Bashir, 1 acre is 0.40 hectare. Sir, what is the production per hectare? Like I get on MG average 5 boxes, 7-foot row, 12-foot high. Okay, let me get this in my mind. And I'm going to tell you in per acre because I'm sorry, I don't have an understanding of hectare. We do have a chart on the page that will translate hectare into acre for you, and you can Google that. I know I'm not going to do the formula. I'm not going to do the formula in my head right now. He gets 5 boxes, 7-foot row, 12-foot height. So his trees are 12 foot high. He's 7-foot row and 3-foot plant. So okay, so he's at 200 apples per plant. He's at 200 apples per plant. I don't really know I don't really know that spacing. I would have to do the math on that. I'm going to have to come back to that. I would have to do the math on that. I don't even know what the variety is. If I knew what the variety is, I can tell you just a real simple formula, and I hope this will help you a little bit. In a third-year apple tree, I want to see 30 bins per acre. You'll have to translate that into hectare, no matter what the spacing is. I want to see 30 bins per acre. Fourth leaf, I want to see 40 to 45 bins per acre in the fourth leaf. By the fifth leaf, I want to be in full production. So by the fifth leaf, I want to be in that 80 to 100 bins per acre range. That's kind of the formula that I like to go by. Some varieties are going to give it to you easier than others, but that's a good target to shoot for. Third leaf, and on a 10 by 2 system, that would be 30 apples per tree. So I hope that helps you out, Bashir. I think you can translate that into hectares. Mike Batinich and Warren Falley, was there a pollinator used for the black pearl in the video? Was there? Yes, the pollinator in the black pearl for the video. There were some Rainier, Index, and also Lapin. Rainier, Index, and Lapin that were used on the black pearl. And incidentally, I learned recently that black pearl also is a great pollinizer for other varieties. Manish Shambra, can we grow Cosmic Crisp on MG in Pradesh, India? If not, why not? The question goes on, but I'm going to give you the short answer. The short answer is no. Cosmic Crisp was developed at the research station here in Prosser, and since it's a Washington State University apple, Washington State has some interest in that apple, and I know that it was held over for 5 years, and that 5-year moratorium has been renewed for another 5 years. So it'll be at least another 5 years before you'll be able to get your hands on the Cosmic Crisp. I hope that answers your question. Natish Kimtek says, for a dry and sunny orchard, packs of water, we're thinking of G890 on Gala in high density, bi-bulb system, slender spindle form, one graft instead of traditional large spacing seedling plants. Would you prefer it? Okay, so he's talking about G890 on a high density. I didn't really say what spacing he would use, but high density, I assume that he's talking about, somewhere between 2 and 3 feet in the row and 10 and 12 feet between rows. Would I recommend a G890? Dry and sunny orchard, packs of water. So I assume he's got good water. I like G890. I've got G890 on some of the best soils that we have, that the space is completely filled in on those trees in the third year. I've also got G890 on some very rough caliche soils, and it's a little harder. It might take 5 years to get the same growth out of that tree. And also on some real high, clay, high altitude soils where it's a little harder to grow the tree, also have some G890. So depending on your soils, G890 is going to react a little differently. I'm going to say yes, it would be a good variety to do, because even in the very, very strong soils, it's not so strong that it begins to alternate. I haven't seen any issues with alternating on G890. And then a little tougher soil where you have a little tougher growing conditions, it gives you that little bit of extra horsepower. Been hearing a lot of people on the site, somebody from New York the other day, and I know areas even up here in the upper Yakima Valley where 890 is not the cure-all. You'll put it in the ground and it'll have a difficulty growing too, but it is a good root. And it has really good horsepower. That and 969 are two very good rootstocks if you have a struggling root soil. Justin Coleric's on board. Jesus Ramos is on board. Pickle Boy, that's an interesting name. Must grow pickles, be my guess. Steve Carl's on board. Nice to have you guys on board. I like the 890, Natish. Yasir Nabi, what can we use for rapid vegetative growth in M9 rootstock? What can we use for rapid vegetative growth? Lots of fertilizer, lots of N. Adequate water. Don't overdo the water. If you overdo the water and the tree has wet feet, it'll actually have the opposite effect and slow it down. So the right amount of water. Proper irrigation, fertigation if you can. If you can fertigate that tree twice a week. I've got these trees right over here behind me, and I have really been pushing those because I know July 15th, here in 2 weeks, I'm going to cut them off, and they're not going to get any more fertilizer. I'll talk about that next week. I like to cut them off in the middle of July because if I grow them too strong into the winter with that vegetative growth, they'll freeze, and I'll end up with phloem damage and all kinds of problems. So I know I've only got 2 more weeks to grow those, so I've really been pushing the fertigation on them. I pushed it so hard I started to see burn around the fringe of the edge of the leaf, and that tells me that I'm overdoing it just a little bit. If you start to see a little bit of burn around the fringe of that leaf, you're going to have the opposite effect. You're going to slow the tree down. So push it as hard as you can without pushing it too hard. Nitrogen, a good CAN 17 or UN 32, a good nitrogen source, and just push them through that growing period. That's how I would do get rapid vegetative growth. Just remember, yes, here you're going to have to calm that tree down at some point. So don't get it too vegetative, because at some point you're going to have to calm that down and get that thing to start producing fruit. Alicia Lind, why can't any tree pollinate another tree? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that trees are very specific to different pollens. Of course, we have been able to develop some trees that are self-pollinizing, so that's helpful. There are some of those out there. I wish I had the answer for you. I don't know, but I do know that they are specific. And again, there's a great chart that I saw on Washington State University website the other day that'll give you every pollinizer for every tree. It'll give you a breakdown of that. Real useful. YouTube at Deep Forest 5477. What is your weed control? What herbicides do you use, and on what? That's a great question. I haven't got this question yet. We haven't talked about herbicides. We've got a lot of organic ground. So organic ground, we use cultural practices. We use a machine called a Weed Wonder. I'm going to post a video of a Weed Wonder this week. It's a cultivator, Lilliston cultivators that cultivate the soil. I like to use the Weed Wonder. It's not destructive. In extreme cases, we'll use a Weed Badger. I like to stay away from the Weed Badger as much as possible on these real dwarfing rootstocks that stay shallow and close to the surface. It can be destructive to rootstocks, but we do use a Weed Badger. We use weed burners a lot, propane weed burners in organics. We'll use weed burners quite a bit. I use zero chemicals, although there are some organic products out there you can use as a herbicide. They don't really work very well. I don't really use them. So cultural practices, if we have to, we'll use a hoe. But hoeing's very expensive, so you want to stay on it mechanically as much as you can. You know, a cheap hoeing bill would be $800 an acre if you have to send people out there with hoes, and it can go anywhere from $800 to $2,000 an acre very, very fast. So the last thing you want to do is use the hoe. So keep the weed burner going and doing it when the weeds are real small. Conventional blocks, I like Roundup. Roundup it's a safe product, and it's cheap. There's no better product out there than Roundup. Of course, you have to be careful. I like to use Roundup in the spring while the plants are pushing and the sap's making its way up in the plant. But after summer solstice, when the plant begins to pull reserves back down to the roots, Roundup becomes very dangerous, and I wouldn't use it anymore after that point. I wouldn't use it in high temperatures because it can volatilize and go up into the atmosphere. I wouldn't use it in situations where I have a lot of suckers because, again, the sucker will take in that Roundup, and you can make the plant very sick or kill the plant in some cases. So you have to be careful about Roundup, but I'm a big fan of Roundup. I'm talking about residuals real quick. I like to use residuals. What residuals do is they don't necessarily kill the plant, but they will stop weed seeds from germinating. So I like to use those either in the fall or in the early spring. Again, they're very expensive. So I don't use them in blocks that have a lot of shade cover that don't have a lot of weeds anyway. I do like to use them in young blocks where I'm fertigating and there's no foliage and you get a lot of sun and the weeds grow really hard in those young trees that you're irrigating a lot, fertigating a lot. I like to use a residual in there to kind of help hold back those weeds a little bit. And any block where I really struggle with weed control, I would like to use a residual, but they're very, very expensive. What do I do after summer solstice when it becomes dangerous to use Roundup? Paraquat, Gramoxone or Paraquat. You want to be real careful with that. You have to be licensed to use Paraquat. You want to be careful when you use it. You don't want to use that in high temperatures. It'll volatilize, and you want to see what the PPE is for those. You want to the PPE that you use for Paraquat is quite a bit different than for other products, frankly, because it's a little more dangerous. But I do use quite a bit of Paraquat or Gramoxone. So that's basically what I use. I like to use Roundup. I use residuals in some cases, but I like to be very strategic about where I use residuals just because of the cost and the effectiveness of those. and of course gramoxone or paraquat, and the cultural practices that we talked about in organics. Anything else, Annie? Oh my goodness. Okay, we got a few more here. She got me this new microphone. Look at that big old microphone there. We're getting all high tech and sophisticated here. Nest here. How can I increase my fruit size? Currently, my fruit size is at post-walnut stage. Can you share any nutritional management system so that for the next season I can overcome the issue of size in my apples? That's a good question. Fruit size in galas, he's about the size of a golf ball. I hate to tell you that by the time that apple gets about the size of a golf ball, it's pretty much decided how big it's going to be. At that point, a small apple is going to be a small apple, and a big apple is going to be a big apple. I hate to tell you that. There are some nutritional products that you can use. I'd be using those quite a bit earlier. I'd be using those foliars at, that pink stage and that couple weeks after pink stage. Much beyond that, I don't know that they're going to do you a lot of good unless you've got some nutritional deficiency in your tree that's holding that tree back. But I think by the time you get to that walnut, that golf ball stage, everything is in that apple that's needed to determine how big that apple can potentially be. And all you're going to do from that point on is you're going to inhibit that apple from becoming all that it can be. I hope that makes sense. But if you do all the right things, it will become all that it can be. In other words, the right things is keeping the water at the right level. That's the most important thing at this stage. You don't want to have too much water, and you don't ever want to let that tree become staged at any point. So holding that soil moisture capacity at 80% is very, very important. Thinning, making sure that by now, you should have those apples thin and spaced. And the other thing I like to do is, depending on the variety, if they tend to be a small apple, like a Gala, I think you mentioned a Gala, I thin those first. I thin and the apples that I'm going to pick first, Premier Honeycrisp, Galas, Wildfire Galas, those are on the list to get thinned first. Always go in those first. Organic blocks we will tend to thin first because there's no chemical thinner and you can get in them first. But beyond that, you want to be very selective about which blocks you go into thin first, because that will have an impact on the size of those apples. So thin early, proper irrigation, and yeah, by now that apple's decided what it's going to be. Atul Batak and Razbawi here. It's nice to have you on board. What do you think about Geneva 214? I just answered that question a while ago. I don't have it. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about it. Munib Rashid, I've noticed in my Red Delicious this year we just answered that question. We've already done that. Jesus Ramos, how do you make the call to start cooling apples when it's hot during the summer? It's a little bit of a tough question because I have several managers, and they all have a little bit different way. Some of the guys have a little temperature probe, and they'll actually go out and probe the apple. And I just talked about the idea that I really encourage them to acclimate that apple. Like if it's 85 degrees and if it's going to top out at 90 today, don't turn it on. And I'm talking early on in the year when you first start cooling. Let that apple acclimate. And you might go out there tomorrow and you might see a sunburnt apple here and there, and that tells you you're right where you need to be. You're going to see a few burnt apples, but let them acclimate. Because if you start turning that water on at 80 degrees this time of year, you better turn it on at 80 degrees for the rest of the year, because that's what it'll be acclimated to. So let them acclimate to about 90 degrees. And by then you can tell the guys, have your water on by 90. And then also you want to be strategic, like we talked about earlier, about which blocks you turn on first. Blocks that have shade cloth, I turn those on last. Blocks that have a good canopy that don't have a tendency to burn, I would turn those on last. But vertical trellis systems that are really exposed to the hot afternoon sun, of course you want to start turning those on first. I generally turn on at 90 degrees. I'm going to tell you the best test that I think there is for whether or not to cool an apple, if I'm not sure, is just jump out of your pickup, reach over and grab a hold of that apple and hold it in your hand. And if that apple is hot in your hand, just think about your skin burning. It's the same as your skin. If your skin would sunburn in that heat, that apple will also sunburn. So I always like to go out and just grab the apple. And if that apple's hot in my hand, it's probably time to turn on. On the other hand, right up till about 85, 90 degrees, if you grow, an apple is transpiring. So if you go up and if you grab that apple, it'll still be cool to the touch at 85, even 90 degrees. But when it starts getting those real hot temperatures where it's going to burn, it will become hot in your hand. So feel it. Do the feel test. But if all else fails, make sure you're on by 90 degrees. You should be pretty safe. Ayala, how would you combat codling moth in organic pears? We answered that question already. That was on our list a while ago. Okay, just talked about that. Nazir wants us to make a detailed video of V-trellis. We'll do that. We've talked about that a couple times. That's going to be a winter video, Nazir. When I get through the thinning and the apple harvest this year, as I start thinking about those things and ordering trellis, I'm going to get some videos up of trellis, and I'll help you out with some of those dimensions. We do a lot of that. Night Babu Babu. What do you do to accelerate apple size on fruit development stage, and how to control russeting at this stage? Just talked about fruit development. Make sure you get them thin. Make sure you do not let the tree become stressed under any circumstances. Hold the water at the right level. Don't over irrigate. And russeting, never spray the tree if you don't have good drying conditions. All right. Well, it looks like we've got through all the questions tonight. Oh, got a couple more here. We're going to do 2 more, and then we're gonna call it good. Always seems to take about an hour. So we're coming right up at an hour here, and it always seems to be an hour. So we got 3 more questions, and we'll call it a night. And I'll go get something to eat. Soe's Bazaar. That's a different name. I've never seen that before. Here at New York State, we use GA41 russet control. Do you have any experience on it? I don't. GA40. Oh. It sounds like a gibberellum product. I haven't used that for russet control. Maybe you can tell us some more about it. That sounds really good. And again, I mentioned there are a couple products that we do use here. I'm going to ask my field man about that and get back to you on that. But yeah, tell us more about that. I'd like to hear more about it. Raj Baniwal. I have an orchard in Canada, Okanagan. Heavier soil. Would a particular cherry or rootstock do better there than another? Currently grow Benton on G6. I have Benton on G6. That's a good cherry, and it's a good root. And Sentinel Mazard there. I want to remove the Sentinel. Yeah. Canada, Okanagan. I've traveled up in that area and looked at cherries before. You guys have a great program up there. Currently grow Benton on G6. I love Benton. Those are, we just picked our Bentons actually 3 or 4 days ago. I would stay with a G6 or a G12. I'm comfortable with those. Even a heavier soil, I would stay with that rootstock. You might have a little tougher time filling your space, but you may want to just close up your space a little bit. In other words, if you're going to do an 8x16, maybe you tighten that up to 6 foot in the row or something like that. I wouldn't exchange that for a Mazard. You'll pay in late production and alternation and fruit set. And so, Raj, I would definitely recommend the Gisela 6 or the Gisela 12. Mazard can be a rootstock. It sounds like you're going to pull yours out, but I would stay with the Gisela 6 or the Gisela 12. Probably the Gisela 12 in those clay soils if I had a choice. But either one of those would be a good rootstock. Sanjeed Sarma, let me get a drink here. Any problem with Geneva 41, which you have experienced so far? The biggest thing that I noticed about Geneva 41 right out of the gate was when you plant those at the graft union, it's really brittle. And whereas a normal tree, you can get your foot down, kind of move those around. If you do that with a Geneva 41, it'll break off right at the graft union. So when you're planting them, you want to be real careful of that and cognizant of that. Beyond that, I love Geneva 41. I can tell you from just this week's experience, it is sold as being fire blight resistant, and I'm sure it is fire blight resistant. But that doesn't mean that the top of that tree can't get fire blight, because it certainly can. I've got a lot of G41s that have fire blight in them now. Maybe not as bad, and maybe not as much of a tendency for that fire blight to make its way back down into the root. But it will get fire blight, and it will run through the tree like a normal tree. But I'm only going to say positive things about Geneva 41 because I've only had positive experiences with them. So I hope that helps. Going to get back out and make some videos this week, and yeah, looking forward to getting back some thinning and some late season cherries. Next week's 4th of July. What's Marlon say? Biku Rungda. Next week is 4th of July, and we're going to celebrate 4th of July. I'm going to have some family here camped out in my yard, and yeah, we're going to have water slide at church next Sunday, but I guarantee you Sunday at 6 p.m. next week, we're going to be right here, and we're going to do this again. So please keep sending those questions throughout the week, and it's nice to have you on board, and we'll see you out there. Thank you.